Hello there, welcome to Nighttime Stories. I hope you've had a wonderful day. Now it's time to unwind. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Before you get cozy, I'd love for you to like this video and subscribe. It helps bring more bedtime stories your way. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, take a deep breath, relax, and let's begin. I never thought I'd be the type to get spooked easily. I've always considered myself pragmatic, grounded in reality, unwilling to entertain paranoia. But if there's one thing I've learned in the past week, it's that some fears aren't irrational. I moved into this house 6 months ago. It was my first real step toward independence after leaving a long-term relationship. The breakup hadn't been messy, just overdue. We both knew it, but I'd clung to the familiar for longer than I should have. When I finally signed the lease for this place, a modest single-story home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, I felt something close to relief, a fresh start, a space that was entirely mine. The house itself was nothing spectacular, but it was enough. 2 bedrooms, a small backyard, a driveway just wide enough for my car. The neighborhood was eerily still at night, which I found peaceful at first. After years of city life, the absence of sirens and distant chatter felt almost unnatural, but I adjusted. Because I lived alone, I took security seriously. I had a Ring doorbell camera installed the week I moved in, along with deadbolts and motion-activated lights. It wasn't paranoia, just common sense. I liked the idea of knowing who was outside before answering the door, and the notifications reassured me. For the first few months, the footage was uneventful, just passing cars, stray cats, and the occasional neighbor retrieving their mail. Then, last Wednesday, I got the first notification. It was 3:13 a.m. I woke to the soft chime of my phone alerting me to motion detected at the front door. Half asleep, I reached for my phone, expecting to see the usual: a car driving by, a possum rustling through the bushes. Instead, I saw him, a man standing perfectly still at the edge of my porch. His posture was unsettling, unnaturally rigid, his arms hanging limply at his sides. He wasn't facing the door, not directly. His head was tilted downward, chin just slightly tucked in, as if he were looking at the camera through his brow. I stared at the image, my pulse beginning to thud dully in my ears. There was something profoundly unsettling about his stillness. He wasn't shifting his weight, wasn't adjusting his stance. He just stood there. I watched for several minutes, expecting him to move, to ring the doorbell, to knock, but he never did. After what felt like forever, I turned on the microphone feature and spoke, my voice groggy but firm. "Can I help you?" The man didn't react. I watched the screen, waiting for even the smallest movement, a flinch, a turn of the head, but he remained utterly motionless. A cold, prickling sensation crawled up my spine. I cleared my throat and tried again. "Sir, are you okay?" Nothing. Then, as if someone had pressed fast forward on a tape, he turned and walked away. The suddenness of his movement jarred me. He didn't pause, didn't hesitate, just turned on his heel and strode off into the night, disappearing past the edge of my camera's frame. I sat there, staring at the now empty porch, my mind racing. What the hell was that? A lost drunk? Someone with a mental illness? A harmless, albeit creepy stranger? That's what I told myself, as I forced my racing heart to slow. By morning, it almost felt like a dream. The next night, I got the notification again, 3:12 a.m. I sat up so fast my vision swam. My fingers fumbled with my phone as I pulled up the live feed, already knowing what I would see. He was back, but this time he was closer, standing one step closer to my front door than the night before. My stomach twisted as I took in his posture, exactly the same, arms loose at his sides, shoulders unnaturally slack. His head tilted just enough to give the impression that he was watching me through the camera. I felt an unfamiliar sting of fear in my chest. This wasn't just a lost traveler or a confused stranger. This was intentional. I turned on the microphone again, my voice sharper now. "Who are you?" He didn't move. Didn't react. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay even. "You need to leave." Still, nothing. Then, after another long, unbearable moment, walked away. Same as before. The moment I spoke, he turned and left. I barely slept that night. By morning, my rational brain was at war with my instincts. I tried to brush it off as coincidence. Maybe he was harmless. Maybe he was a sleepwalker. Maybe nothing. Something wasn't right. I debated calling the police, but what would I say? That a man stood silently outside my door 2 nights in a row. That wasn't a crime. Not yet. So instead, I did what any anxious person would do. I stayed up the next night, waiting. I kept my phone next to me, screen brightness dimmed, the Ring app open. I forced myself to keep the lights off, hoping to avoid drawing attention. As 3 a.m. neared, my heartbeat felt like a drum against my ribs. Then the notification. My breath caught in my throat. "Motion detected at your front door." Hands trembling, I tapped the notification, my pulse roaring in my ears. The feed loaded. My stomach turned to ice. He was even closer. This time, he stood directly in front of my door. A single foot away. My skin went cold. His face. I could see his face, this time. But something was wrong. His mouth was slightly open. His lips parted just enough that I could see the gleam of teeth. I had the strangest, most irrational thought as he smiling. I didn't speak this time. I just watched, waiting, holding my breath. Then his head tilted. It was so subtle, so slow, that at first I thought I imagined it. But no, he was moving, just slightly, leaning toward the camera, like he was trying to hear something. I couldn't take it anymore. I flipped on my porch light. The instant the light flooded the area, he bolted. No hesitation, no slow, eerie retreat like before. He turned and ran. Fast. I barely caught the blur of his movement before he vanished into the night. My fingers were already dialing 911. I didn't care if it wasn't technically a crime. I wasn't waiting for it to become one. The police arrived within 15 minutes. 2 officers, both looking more irritated than concerned, as if they had expected a drunken disturbance or a false alarm. I didn't care, I just wanted someone to listen. I met them outside, arms crossed over my chest, trying to suppress the nervous tremor in my hands. I replayed everything, from the first night's footage to the way he ran the moment the porch light turned on. One of the officers, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, jotted notes in a small pad. The other, younger and lankier, sighed audibly. "So, he didn't try to break in?" "No," I admitted, but my voice hardened. "That doesn't mean this is normal." The older officer gave a small nod. "You have the footage?" I pulled up the videos on my phone, my fingers shaking slightly as I played them. The younger cop leaned in first, frowning at the eerie stillness of the man on screen. The first night, then the second when he was closer. Finally, I showed them the most recent clip where he stood directly in front of my door. When the man on screen tilted his head ever so slightly, the older cop exhaled, shifting on his feet. "Okay," he muttered. The younger one, still skeptical, crossed his arms. He could just be casing the place. I shook my head. Then why didn't he try to get in? Why hasn't he knocked, spoken, done anything except stand there? Neither of them had an answer. The older cop sighed. "We'll file a report, but there's not much we can do unless he actually commits a crime." I clenched my jaw, already knowing that was going to be their response. "What if he comes back?" "Call us," the younger one said. "And maybe leave the porch light on." It seemed to scare him off. I wanted to scream. That's it? That's all they had? But arguing wouldn't change anything. They did a quick sweep of my yard, shining their flashlights along the fence line. But they didn't find anything, no footprints, no signs that someone had been lurking for hours. Just like that, they left. I watched their taillights disappear down the street, then turned back to my house. My front door suddenly looked different. Thinner, weaker. Like it wouldn't do a damn thing to stop him if he really wanted in. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat in my living room, curled up on the couch, my laptop open with a fresh Google search staring back at me. How to get rid of a stalker. The results were frustratingly vague. Get security cameras, I already had one. Install better locks done. Call the police, I had. And it got me nowhere. The best advice? Leave. I hated that answer. This was my home. I wasn't going to let some unhinged stranger drive me out of it. But when I checked my phone around 3 a.m., the breath left my lungs. Motion detected at your front door. I nearly dropped my phone. My fingers moved on their own, opening the Ring app, my vision narrowing to the small screen. The feed loaded. My blood turned to ice. He was back, but he wasn't standing at the door anymore. He was crouched. His body was lowered to the ground, his face inches from the camera. My breath caught in my throat. His mouth was open slightly wider than before. His eyes, too wide, stared directly into the lens. I felt like he could see me, like he knew I was watching. The camera had audio recording on by default, but I had never heard anything on the previous clips. Tonight was different. I turned up the volume and nearly dropped my phone. He was whispering. I couldn't make out the words at first, just a low, murmuring hum, like he was talking to himself. Then suddenly his voice became clear. The notification sat on my screen like a warning I wasn't ready to face. Motion detected in your backyard. I stared at the words, my mind momentarily blank, my body frozen in place. The house felt too quiet. The air around me had a thickness to it, like the silence itself was waiting for me to react. My hand trembled as I tapped the notification. The video feed loaded. My stomach lurched. There he was, standing at the far end of my backyard, just barely visible in the grainy glow of the porch light. He wasn't at the door this time. He had gone around. For the first time, I could see his entire body. He was thin, too thin. His clothes looked baggy, almost oversized, like they didn't belong to him. His hands hung loosely at his sides, his fingers slightly curled. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle, as if his neck couldn't quite hold the weight. And then, slow deliberately, he stepped forward. Not fast. Not running. Just walking. Straight toward my house. A sharp pang of panic hit me square in the chest, snapping me out of my trance. I scrambled out of bed, my pulse thudding in my ears as I rushed to the window overlooking the yard, my breath caught in my throat. The back porch light was still on. The camera feed hadn't glitched. He was real. He was there. And he was closer than before. My body acted before my brain did. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. It rang once. Twice. Then, bang. The sound rattled through the house. I let out a choked gasp, my hands tightening around the phone. The operator's voice came through. 911, what's your emergency? There's... My voice came out, ragged, breathless. I turned back to the window. He was gone. I blinked rapidly, my vision scanning the yard. The spot where he'd been standing was empty. No sign of movement. No retreating figure. Nothing. The operator's voice came again. Hello? I swallowed, forcing myself to speak. Someone's in my backyard. The words felt foreign, like I wasn't the one saying them. Like I was still trying to convince myself this was actually happening. Are they attempting to enter your home? I didn't know. My hands shook violently as I flipped through my camera feeds. Front door? Clear. Side yard? Empty. Backyard? No one there. But that didn't make sense. Where the hell did he go? The only way out of the backyard was through the gate or over the fence, and I hadn't heard either move. "Officers are en route," the operator said, her tone calm but firm. "Stay inside. Do not engage with them." I barely muttered a response before hanging up. Then, cautiously, I made my way toward the back door. Every instinct in my body was screaming, "Don't." But I had to see. I kept the porch light on, my fingers hovering over the deadbolt. My other hand gripped the baseball bat I had grabbed from my closetta, useless weapon, but still, something. My breath felt too loud in the silence. I pressed my eye to the peephole. Darkness. Nothing but the faint glow of the porch light bouncing off the wooden fence. Where the hell did he go? Then, a tap. I nearly dropped the bat. A soft, rhythmic tap coming from the side of the house. I turned, my stomach twisting. My side window. Slowly, hesitantly, I crept toward it, my pulse hammering in my ears. The window had blinds, partially drawn, leaving just an inch of open space at the bottom. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I leaned forward, just enough to see through the small gap. And there he was. His face, right up against the glass. My breath hitched. My entire body seized with cold, gut-wrenching terror. He was grinning. A wide, unnatural grin stretched across his too-thin face. His lips were parted slightly, just enough to show his teeth. And his eyes, they weren't right. Not crazed, not angry, just focused, intentional. Like he was enjoying this. Like he knew exactly what he was doing. I stumbled back so fast I nearly tripped. My shoulders slammed against the wall, my breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. Then sirens. The sudden wail of police sirens tore through the quiet night. Red and blue lights flashed through my windows. And just like that, he was gone. The cops didn't find him. Again. They searched the entire property, the surrounding yards, even a few blocks down the street. Nothing. No footprints. No signs of forced entry. Like he had vanished. I stood outside, wrapped in a blanket, my entire body still shaking violently. One of the officers, the same sharp-eyed woman from before, approached me. "Are you absolutely sure it was the same man?" I shot her a look. I saw his face. Her expression stayed neutral, but something behind her eyes shifted. "You need to stay somewhere else for a few nights," she said. I shook my head. "I have nowhere else to go." She hesitated, then sighed. "We'll do extra patrols in the area. But listen, whoever this guy is, he's not just watching anymore. He's pushing boundaries." A cold pit formed in my stomach. Next time, he might not run. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of my living room, bat in hand, staring at the locked doors, waiting for another notification. None came. Morning finally arrived, and with it, a sinking feeling that this wasn't over. I spent the day researching emergency security upgrades. I scheduled an installation for the next morning. Reinforced locks, motion sensors inside, a second camera facing the backyard. I wasn't taking chances anymore. By nightfall, I felt exhausted but prepared. Then, just before midnight, someone knocked on my door. I froze. Not the ring notification, not motion detected. A knock. Soft, slow, deliberate. I grabbed my phone, pulling up the camera feed. My stomach dropped. There was no one there. The porch was empty, but the knocking continued. 3 steady taps. And then, from behind me, tap, tap, tap. From the backyard, the knocking didn't stop. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat, the weight of silence pressing down on me. 3 knocks, from the front door. 3 more, from the backyard. I swallowed hard, my fingers gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The ring feed still showed nothing. No movement, no figures, no one was there. But I heard it. I felt it. the cold, inescapable reality that I was not alone. A slow, sickening realization crept in. He wasn't just testing my fear anymore. He was playing with it. I forced my body to move. My limbs felt sluggish, weighed down by the pulse of panic flooding my veins. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs, my mind screaming, "Do something." I tightened my grip on the bat in my other hand, my breath unsteady as I turned toward the back window. The knocking had stopped. I peered through the blinds, keeping my movements slow, careful. The backyard light was still on. The camera feed had no motion detected. But I could feel him. My stomach twisted painfully. I tapped 911 again, my voice hushed but urgent. He's back. He's knocking on both sides. The dispatcher's tone sharpened. "Officers are on their way. Stay inside. Keep all doors and windows locked." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. Then a sound cut through the silence. The doorknob rattled. My breath hitched. I turned, my body rigid, my eyes locked on the front door. The handle twisted, slowly, carefully, as if testing for weakness. I couldn't breathe. This was different. This wasn't just standing and watching. This was him trying to come inside. My entire body screamed to run. But to where? There was nowhere to go. I raised the bat, my hands trembling. I backed away, inch by inch, toward the kitchen. If he got in, I needed something better than a bat. A knife, something sharp, something that could stop him. The doorknob stopped rattling. Silence. I held my breath. Then I heard it. A whisper. Low, almost too faint to make out. "I see you." My stomach dropped. It wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from inside the house. My body locked up. Number. No, no, no. That wasn't possible. I spun, my eyes scanning the dimly lit space behind me. The hallway stretched into shadows, leading to the bedroom and the second, smaller guest room. The air felt heavy, thick, like I was being watched. I gripped the bat so tightly my hands ached. A faint creak echoed down the hall. From the guest room, my throat went dry. I had locked everything. Hadn't I? I forced my legs to move, my steps cautious, deliberate. Every inch of my skin prickled with the overwhelming sensation that something was wrong. I reached the guest room door. It was open. Just an inch. The way it always was when I walked past it at night. I had never thought much of it before. Now it felt like a trap. I braced myself, raised the bat. Then, with a sharp breath, I kicked the door wide open. The room was dark. Still, empty. My pulse thundered. I exhaled shakily, forcing myself to look around. The closet was closed, the window locked. I took a step forward, then another. My breath was uneven, my nerves frayed. I reached for the closet handle, one last place to check. Then something moved. A low, rustling sound. Not in the closet. Not behind me. Above me. In the vent. My chest constricted. The vent cover was loose, just barely, like it had been shifted recently. I stared, horrified, as the realization hit me like a tidal wave. He had been inside the house all along. I didn't have time to think. I turned and ran. I barely made it 3 steps before something crashed behind me, a sudden violent sound metal hitting the floor. He was coming down. I didn't look back. I sprinted toward the front door, my lungs burning, my fingers fumbling with the locks. Then sirens. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. The police. A sharp, heavy thud sounded from behind me. I felt the air shift as someone moved fast. The officers burst through the door. I turned, my vision blurring, my chest heaving. He was gone. The vent cover lay on the ground. The small, narrow opening gaped like a tunnel leading into darkness. But he was nowhere in sight. The officers moved fast, weapons drawn, clearing the house room by room. Then, from the hallway, one of them shouted, "The attic hatch is open." My stomach clenched. They found him. The next moments were a blur, yelling, stomping boots, the sharp crack of wood splitting as they pulled someone down. And then a face. His face. Thin, hollow. His skin stretched tightly over his cheekbones. His clothes were stained, torn in places. He looked like he hadn't been outside in weeks. And his eyes, they were locked on me. Even as the officers pinned him down, even as they hauled him away in cuffs, she never stopped staring. His mouth twitched. Then, just before they dragged him out the door, he whispered soft, knowing, like a secret just for me. I was inside for a long time. They found a makeshift space in the attic. A small, disgusting nest of blankets, empty water bottles, food wrappers. He had been living above me, watching, listening, slipping in and out without me ever knowing. The worst part? They found a notebook, filled with pages of observations about me, my schedule, what time I went to bed, what nights I left the house, and in one entry, scrawled in shaky handwriting, "Soon. I moved out immediately, sold the house, left everything behind. Even now, months later, I still can't sleep without checking the vents, without checking the locks, the doors, the ceilings. Because the truth is, I don't think he ever wanted to break in. I think he was waiting for me to find him. And I had, just in time." I never put much thought into imaginary friends. When I was a kid, I had one myself, a little boy named Timmy, who lived under my bed and only came out at night. I barely remember him now, just vague childhood memories of talking to someone who was never really there. So, when my 5-year-old daughter Lily started talking about her new friend, I didn't think much of it. At first it was cute. She would chat away in her room, whispering excitedly like she was sharing secrets. Sometimes I'd hear her giggle at nothing, or turn suddenly as if someone had tapped her on the shoulder. When I asked her about it, she just smiled and said, "I'm playing with the tall man." That was the first time I felt it, a weird, uneasy sensation. I forced a chuckle. "Oh yeah, who's the tall man?" "He lives in my closet," she said simply, like it was the most normal thing in the world. A shiver crawled up my spine. Kids say weird things all the time, I reminded myself. It was just her imagination. Still, I found myself glancing toward her closet more often than usual, just in case. For the first few weeks, it was just talk, nothing serious. She would tell me how the tall man liked to sit in the corner and listen to her stories, how sometimes he played hide and seek. "How do you play hide and seek with him?" I asked one night as I tucked her in. Lily pulled the covers up to her chin and giggled. "He hides in the walls." I paused. "In the walls?" She nodded. "He's really good at it." My fingers stiffened around the edge of the blanket. I wanted to brush it off, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. That night I kept her closet door open. I don't know why. It wasn't like I was expecting to find anything. But as I lay in bed, staring at the faint sliver of her nightlight glowing under my own door, a nagging thought crept into my head. What if she wasn't making this up? The first time I felt real fear was about a week later. I had just put Lily to bed and was in the kitchen washing dishes when I heard her start crying. Not just a little whimper, full-on sobbing. I ran into her room, heart pounding. She was sitting upright in bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, tears streaming down her cheeks. "What's wrong?" I asked, already pulling her into my arms. Between hiccuping breaths, she whispered, "He's mad at me." I stiffened. "Who?" "The tall man." I swallowed hard. "Why is he mad?" She sniffled. "Because you closed the closet too early." A sharp chill ran through my body. I turned my head slowly toward the closet. It was open, but I knew for a fact I had closed it before tucking her in. I tried to stay calm. "Lily, Did you open the closet? She shook her head quickly, burying her face into my chest. I didn't want to look. I really didn't. But my eyes drifted toward the closet anyway. And that's when I saw it. The clothes inside were swaying. Not much, just the faintest movement, like someone had brushed past them, or had just been standing there. I felt my stomach drop. A suffocating wave of cold washed over me, my body screaming move. I stood up quickly, flipping on the main light. I grabbed Lily and carried her into my room, locking the door behind us. That night she slept in my bed. I didn't sleep at all. The next day I did a full sweep of the house. I checked every window, every door, every lock. Nothing was open. Nothing was out of place. I even went into Lily's closet myself, pushing the hangers aside, knocking on the walls. Solid. No hidden spaces. Just my own paranoia making me crazy. That's what I told myself. But that night, Lily wouldn't sleep in her room. She clung to me, her little fingers gripping my shirt, whispering, "He doesn't like when you check the closet." I didn't know what to say to that. I just held her close and told her everything was okay, even though I wasn't sure if it was. The final straw came 2 nights later. It was just past midnight when I heard something that made my blood run cold. A soft scraping sound. I jolted awake, my heart hammering in my chest. I turned my head toward Lily. She was fast asleep beside me, her tiny body rising and falling with steady breaths. The scraping sound came again. Slow, deliberate, coming from inside the wall. I held my breath, ears straining. For a long moment it was silent. Then, a whisper. Faint, just barely audible. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew exactly where it was coming from. Lily's closet. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the door, paralyzed. Then, out of nowhere, a sharp 3-knock pattern, coming from inside the closet. A cold, sinking terror rooted me in place. I waited. I listened. Nothing else came. The air in the room felt thick, too heavy to breathe. After what felt like an eternity, I finally reached for my phone and checked the time. 3:12 a.m. I gritted my teeth and forced myself up, my entire body tense. I crept toward the closet, every instinct screaming don't. But I had to. I had to prove to myself that there was nothing there. I raised a shaky hand and, without giving myself a chance to hesitate, yanked the closet door open. Nothing. Just hangers, toys, the usual. I let out a breath. My head swam. Then, just as I was about to shut the door, I noticed something. A tiny sliver of darkness between the wall and the floor. I crouched down, pulse thudding in my ears. And that's when I saw it. A small gap. Not noticeable at first glance, but just big enough for someone to slip fingers through. Just big enough for someone to hide behind. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. And then, with shaking hands, I knocked back. 3 times. The same slow pattern. I held my breath. Waited. And then, 3 knocks came back. From inside the wall. I didn't move. My breath was locked in my chest, my hands frozen at my sides, my ears straining as if I had misheard. But I hadn't. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate, coming from inside the wall. A cold, paralyzing dread settled in my bones. My rational mind was scrambling for an explanation, pipes, settling wood, anything that made sense. But deep down I knew. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't hearing things. Something or someone was knocking back. I stumbled backward, slamming the closet door shut so hard, the entire frame shuddered. My pulse was thundering in my ears, my skin damp with cold sweat. I didn't even realize I was shaking until I tried to grab my phone and nearly dropped it. I forced myself to take a deep breath, think. I needed to do something. Call the police? And tell them what, that my closet was knocking back? They'd think I was insane. Wake Lily? Number absolutely not. I didn't want her anywhere near that room. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the nearest piece of furniture, a small dresser, and dragged it in front of the closet. The scraping sound of wood against wood made my skin crawl, but I didn't care. I wasn't opening that door again. I backed away slowly, staring at the closet like it might lunge at me. Nothing happened. I waited, listened. The silence stretched and stretched. Finally, after what felt like forever, I turned off the light and left the room. I didn't go back to sleep that night. The next morning, I tried to convince myself that I had overreacted. Maybe it really was the house settling. Maybe the sound had been from outside, and I misheard it. I tried to be logical, tried to let it go. But then, at breakfast, Lily said something that made my stomach drop. "Mommy, why did you lock the tall man in the closet?" My fork clattered against my plate. I turned to her slowly, my throat tightening. "What did you say?" Lily frowned slightly, her little fingers poking at her cereal. "He's mad at you." A cold shiver crawled up my spine. I forced my voice to stay even. "Lily, have you seen him today?" She nodded. "He peeked at me this morning, from the closet." I swallowed hard, but I moved the dresser in front of it. Lily tilted her head. "I know." Silence stretched between us. Then she leaned in, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "He said he can still see you." My stomach turned. I forced out a shaky breath, trying to stay calm. "Lily, honey, how long has the tall man been in your closet?" She shrugged, taking another bite of cereal. "A long time." I hesitated. "And what does he look like?" She thought about it for a moment. Then, very matter-of-factly, she said, "He has no eyes." I nearly knocked over my chair. I was done. This was no longer just a child's imagination. Something was wrong. I needed answers. That afternoon, I called my landlord. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I was hoping for something that would make sense of all this. She picked up on the third ring. "This is Carol." "Hi, this is..." I cleared my throat. "I live in the house on Maplewood. I had some questions about the property." A pause. "All right." I hesitated. How the hell was I supposed to phrase this? Finally, I settled on, "Has anyone ever mentioned strange noises in the walls?" Silence. It stretched on too long. My grip on the phone tightened. "Carol?" She let out a slow breath. "Why do you ask?" Something in her tone made my stomach knot. I forced a laugh, trying to sound casual. "Just weird sounds at night. You know how old houses are." Another pause. Then quietly she said, "You should check the attic." A heavy weight dropped in my chest. "What?" Another breath. "You have an attic access, right? In the hallway?" I turned my head slowly, my eyes locking onto the small square panel in the ceiling just outside Lily's room. I had never thought much about it. It was one of those pull-down panels with a flimsy wooden ladder inside. My skin crawled. Carol's voice was tense. "Just check it." I swallowed hard. "Why?" A beat of silence. Then, carefully, she said, "Because the last tenants complained about the same thing." I went cold. My fingers clenched around the phone. "What do you mean?" Carol sighed. "They swore they heard footsteps in the ceiling at night, whispering. They even thought someone was living up there." My mouth went dry. "And?" "And," she continued, "when we finally checked, we found nothing. But the dust was disturbed, like someone had been up there moving around." A thick, suffocating silence stretched between us. My entire body felt numb. Finally, Carol added, almost reluctantly, "You're not the first person to call me about this." I stood under the attic hatch for a long time, staring at it. The air in the hallway felt thick, still, like something was waiting. I knew I shouldn't do it, but I had to. With shaking hands, I grabbed a chair and positioned it directly under the panel. I climbed on top, my pulse thudding painfully in my ears. The pull string was covered in dust. I grabbed it with trembling fingers and yanked. The wooden ladder creaked as it unfolded. A wave of cold air rushed down from the attic. It smelled stale. I grabbed my phone, flipped on the flashlight, and slowly, cautiously, climbed the first few steps. The attic was dark, the kind of darkness that swallowed light whole. I lifted my phone, shining the beam around. The space was empty, just wooden beams, insulation, footprints in the dust, a trail of them leading to the far corner. My breath hitched. I lifted the phone higher, and then in the corner I saw it. A hole, a gap in the attic floor, just big enough for someone to slip through. To the walls, to the closet. The realization hit me like ice water. Someone had been in Lily's closet. Not a ghost, not an imaginary friend. Someone real, hiding, watching. My stomach twisted. Then, from behind me, a sound, a soft exhale. Too close. Right behind me, I felt the breath before I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible exhaler right behind me. Every muscle in my body locked. The air around me felt thick, suffocating, pressing down on me like a weight. My grip on my phone tightened. I didn't want to turn around. I couldn't. But something in my brain whispered, "You have to." Slowly, I turned my head, my breath caught in my throat. Nothing. Just the dark, yawning space of the attic behind me. The silence was worse than the noise. I swallowed hard, forcing my heartbeat to slow. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the air shifted when I pulled the attic door open. Maybe a sudden creak to my left. I whipped my phone's flashlight toward the sound. The dim glow flickered over wooden beams, insulation, a blanket, stuffed into the farthest corner of the attic. Not folded, not placed neatly, crumpled, used. Next to it, an empty water bottle, a torn granola bar wrapper. My stomach lurched. This wasn't just a hiding place. Someone had been living here. For how long? A week? A month? Since before I moved in? I took a step back, my foot pressing into the creaky wooden plank beneath me. My breath was coming too fast, my hands trembling as I lifted my phone, scanning the attic again. The footprints in the dust, the hole leading into the walls. I felt like I was going to be sick. This wasn't a ghost. This wasn't Lily's imagination. There was someone in my house. I turned, moving fast. I nearly tripped over my own feet as I scrambled down the attic ladder, landing hard on the hallway floor. My ankle twisted slightly, sending a sharp stab of pain up my leg, but I didn't stop. I grabbed the chair and shoved it against the attic door, my hands shaking as I stepped back, staring at it. The house was too quiet. I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears. Lily. I turned and ran toward her room. She was still asleep, curled up in my bed, her tiny hands clutching her stuffed rabbit. I exhaled sharply, relief crashing over me. I sat beside her, brushing the hair from her face, my fingers still trembling. What the hell was I supposed to do? The police. I had to call the police. I grabbed my phone, my fingers hovering over the dial pad. Then I froze. A new sound. Soft, slow, coming from the closet, a gentle knock. Not loud, not frantic. Like whoever was inside didn't want to wake Lily. My throat tightened. I turned my head slowly, my breath shallow. The closet door was open an inch. I stared at it, my body rigid with fear. I knew I had closed it. And behind that door, the gap in the wall, the one that led to the attic. I stood, moving carefully so I wouldn't wake Lily. My mind was screaming at me to run, to grab my daughter and get the hell out. But I had to see. I had to know. I crept toward the closet, my pulse hammering in my ears. Every step felt too loud. The door creaked as I pushed it open. The closet was dark, but I could just barely make out the gap in the drywall. It was wider now, not a sliver anymore, not a small, unnoticed crack. It looked peeled back, like someone had been using it, like someone had crawled through it. I reached for the light chain and pulled. The bulb flickered on. My stomach dropped. There were fingerprints on the inside of the drywall, smudges in the dust, trailing up and down, like someone had been gripping the edges, like someone had been climbing in and out. My hands started shaking uncontrollably. I took a step back, and then I heard it, a whisper, so soft, so close, right in my ear. "I see you," I screamed. I don't remember moving. I don't remember grabbing Lily. All I know is that I ran. I tore out of the house, my daughter clutched in my arms, my heart slamming against my ribs. I didn't stop until I was outside, my bare feet hitting the freezing pavement of the driveway. I barely registered the sound of my own voice as I called 911. All I could think about was that voice, that whisper. So close. Too close. The police arrived fast. Faster than I expected. Maybe it was the hysterical way I had screamed into the phone, my words barely coherent. Maybe it was because I was crying in the driveway when they pulled up, my daughter clinging to me, half asleep and confused. 2 officers searched the house while another tried to calm me down. I couldn't stop shaking. I could barely get the words out. "There's someone in there." The officer nodded, speaking in a calm, measured tone. "We'll handle it. Just stay here with your daughter." I clutched Lily tightly as she buried her face into my shoulder. Minutes passed. Then shouting. Loud, urgent, a crash. My heart lurched. The officers had found something. One of them came back out, his face tense. He pulled the other officer aside, speaking in hushed tones. I stepped forward, barely able to breathe. "What?" I demanded. "Did you find him?" The officer turned to me, his expression unreadable. "We found signs that someone's been living in the attic." My body went cold. "But he's not there now." I felt like the ground was shifting beneath me. Where? Where is he? The officer hesitated. Then carefully he said, "We don't know." They searched for hours. The attic, the walls, the crawl space beneath the house. But he was gone. Whoever he was, he had escaped. The police found a sleeping bag, stolen food, a small notebook filled with numbers and scribbled notes. They wouldn't tell me what was in it, but I saw their faces when they read it. I knew it wasn't good. I packed up that night. Lily and I left and never looked back. The house is empty now. Someone new will move in eventually. And maybe, just maybe, he'll come back. Because one thing still keeps me up at night. One thing the officer told me before I left. They dusted for prints. They found several sets. But one of them was Lily's. We had been hiking for hours, the trees growing denser and the trail narrowing, winding deeper into the forest. It was supposed to be a relaxing trip, a getaway from our busy lives, just the 2 of us, alone in the woods. But as the hours passed and the sun started to dip behind the canopy, the forest began to feel... The air grew heavy. The wind carried a chill that made me shiver despite the warmth of the day. Rachel, my girlfriend, didn't seem to notice. She was ahead of me, her light backpack swaying gently with each step. She had always been the braver one, the adventurous one. I had never really been a fan of the outdoors, but I had agreed to the trip. I figured it was time for me to try something new, and I wanted to make her happy. But now, as the daylight faded and the shadows stretched longer, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. I glanced around, but all I saw were trees. Thick, silent, unfeeling trees. Then we saw them. At first I thought they were hikers like us, just another couple or a group of friends out for a walk. They were standing in a clearing, talking among themselves in low voices. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but something about the way they stood in the middle of the woods, almost too still, made me uneasy. Rachel, always the social one, waved and called out a greeting. "Hey, you guys hiking too?" The strangers turned toward us, their faces expressionless. There were 4 of them, 2 men and 2 women. Their clothes were odd, almost outdated. It was a strange mix of modern and old-fashioned, like they didn't quite belong in the present day. But their eyes, those eyes, were what unnerved me the most. They were too calm, too still. One of the men, tall with a beard and a gray jacket, smiled at Rachel's greeting. But his smile didn't seem to reach his eyes. "Yeah, we're just out for a walk," he said in a soft, monotone voice. "Where are you headed?" Rachel asked, stepping forward. "Around," the woman beside him said, her voice almost a whisper. "Around the woods." I felt a shiver run down my spine. Rachel, not sensing my discomfort, smiled brightly. "Well, we're on our way to the ridge. It's beautiful up there, perfect for watching the sunset." The strangers exchanged a brief, unreadable glance, then nodded in unison. "That sounds nice," the other man said. "Yeah," the woman added. "You should enjoy it." We stood there for a few more minutes, making small talk with them, but the longer I stayed, the more I realized something didn't feel right. Their answers were too vague, their movements too stiff. It was like they were giving me just enough to not seem odd, but not enough to make sense. Rachel was still chatting with them when I noticed it. They hadn't asked us anything. Not a single question. They didn't inquire about where we were from, what we were doing here, nothing. It was like they didn't care who we were or why we were out here in the woods. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they started to turn and walk away, moving in the same strange, synchronized way. "Take care," one of them called back, without looking over their shoulder. We watched them disappear into the trees, their movements eerily smooth. After they were gone, Rachel turned to me, still smiling. "They were nice. Hmm?" I didn't know how to answer. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. "They were strange," I said, trying to sound casual. She laughed and patted my arm. "You're overthinking it. They were probably just out for a peaceful hike like us." I nodded, but I didn't feel any better. The deeper we went into the woods, the more I felt eyes on me, as if the trees themselves were watching. Then, about an hour later, it happened. We heard footsteps behind us. At first I thought it was another hiker, maybe someone passing by. But when I turned to look, there was no one there. I shook it off. Just my imagination, I told myself. But then it happened again. A faint rustling of leaves, the sound of something moving behind us. I looked at Rachel, but she hadn't noticed. She was too focused on the trail ahead. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice low. "Hear what?" she asked, glancing at me with a smile. "I think someone's following us," I said, my heart pounding. Rachel stopped walking and turned around, but there was no one there. "Stop freaking out," she said, laughing softly. "You're just paranoid." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But as the minutes passed, I couldn't shake the feeling. I had been hiking for long enough to know when something was off, and something was definitely wrong. As the sun finally set, we decided to head back to the campsite. I was relieved to finally be heading in the right direction. But that's when it happened again. The sound of footsteps. I turned around quickly, my stomach dropping. There, standing in the fading light, were the 4 strangers. They weren't running, they weren't shouting, they were just standing there, watching us. I grabbed Rachel's arm. "We need to go, now." But as we turned to leave, I noticed something terrifying. No matter how fast we walked, the strangers were always just behind us. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, but it was too much to ignore. Each time I glanced back, they were there, walking at the same steady pace. No matter how fast we moved, they kept a perfect distance, never rushing, never running, but never falling behind either. We picked up the pace. I started to jog. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. Something in my gut told me if we did, they would hear it. But they didn't move any faster. They just kept following, as silent and as still as shadows. We finally reached the edge of the woods near the parking lot, and I turned one last time. The strangers were still there, standing at the tree line, watching us. They didn't approach, they didn't say a word, they just stood there, silent, unwavering. I didn't know if we were ever going to get away. We got in the car and left without looking back. I didn't care if I was being paranoid anymore. All I knew was that the feeling of being followed wouldn't leave me, and I couldn't shake the thought that they were still out there, watching. The next day we packed up and left the area. We didn't talk much on the way back to the city, both of us silently processing the strange encounter. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Those unblinking eyes, watching from the trees, never moving closer, but always just behind us. I couldn't help but feel they had been more than just hikers. Something about their perfect calm, their synchronized movements, didn't sit right. And the worst part? They didn't need to chase us. They were always just one step behind. We didn't speak much on the drive home, both of us lost in our thoughts, trying to make sense of what had happened. The evening had turned from a peaceful hike into something far more sinister. As we got closer to the city, I thought I'd finally be able to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. But it lingered. The air in the car felt heavier, the road seemed darker. Every turn I took, every passing streetlight felt like it was closing in on me. Rachel was quiet, her face pale in the dim light, and I could tell she was replaying the same events over and over in her mind. We had both been unsettled by the strangers, but I couldn't tell if it was just fear or something worse that was making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. As I turned onto the highway, the headlights flickered for a brief moment, and I slammed on the brakes instinctively. The car jolted to a stop, and I sat there for a moment, my heart pounding. Rachel's voice broke the silence, her tone more nervous than usual. "Did you see that?" she asked, her eyes darting nervously out the window. I blinked and looked around. There was nothing unusual about the road, just empty fields and the occasional passing car. "See what?" I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the tremor in it. "Back there," she insisted, "in the trees. It looked like one of them, one of the people from the woods." I looked at her, trying to make sense of what she was saying. It was impossible. We were miles away from the forest now. I shook my head. "Rachel, it's just your mind playing tricks on you. We're fine." But even as I said the words, I felt the discomfort creeping back in, like something was still out there. We didn't speak for the rest of the drive, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that we weren't alone. The sensation that we were being watched had returned, only this time it was even more intense. Every reflection in the rearview mirror felt wrong. Too still, too quiet. I kept glancing back, but there was nothing, just the dark highway behind us. When we finally arrived at the apartment, I thought I'd be able to breathe again. We had made it back to safety, away from the woods, away from the strangers. But as I got out of the car, I noticed something strange. The hairs on my neck stood up again. A set of footprints, wet, muddy, and fresh, led from the entrance of our building, disappearing around the corner of the parking lot. It couldn't be. I froze. Rachel had already gone inside, but I stood there for a moment, staring at the footprints. They led toward the entrance where we'd parked earlier, but then they turned. They veered off toward the side of the building. I felt my stomach twist. The only explanation that made sense was that someone had followed us here. Someone who had been with us in the woods. The strangers. But how had they gotten here so quickly? How had they known exactly where we were going? Later that night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises, scratching sounds at the door, soft thuds against the walls, the feeling of something watching me from the dark corners of the room. I kept checking the windows, locking and unlocking the door, even though I knew it wouldn't make a difference. My thoughts kept returning to the footprints. Had they been here? Had they watched us come in? Rachel was asleep, oblivious to the sense of dread that had taken over me. I felt paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the strangers were still with us, silently waiting for the right moment. I decided to check the balcony. The apartment was on the second floor, so there was no reason anyone could easily get up there. but I had to make sure. As I walked to the sliding door, my breath caught in my throat. There, in the darkness outside, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure, standing motionless at the edge of the parking lot, looking up at the apartment. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure was dressed in dark clothes, just like the strangers from the woods. I couldn't make out their face, but their posture was eerily familiar. Still, unnervingly still. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes again, the figure was gone. I woke Rachel and told her we needed to leave, but she refused. She didn't believe me. "You're just freaking out," she said, rubbing her eyes. "We're home now. It's over." But as much as I tried to calm myself, the presence outside felt real. I was convinced the strangers had followed us here. Even if they hadn't come inside, their presence loomed over us. I stayed up the rest of the night, jumping at every creak of the building, every sound that echoed in the darkness. And in the morning, when I checked the balcony again, there were no signs of anyone being there. But I knew what I'd seen. The next few days were a blur. I tried to put the whole thing behind me, tried to tell myself it was nothing more than paranoia, but I couldn't escape the feeling that they were still out there. Rachel and I started to notice things, little things that didn't add up. We found our front door slightly ajar in the mornings, the living room lights on when we were sure we'd turned them off. And one night, as I walked down the hallway, I could have sworn I heard a faint whisper from the dark, like someone was standing just beyond the shadows, watching. I couldn't shake the thought that the strangers had never truly left us. Their calm, silent presence had followed us back into our lives, and no matter how far we ran, no matter how much we tried to escape the woods, they would always be one step behind. Days turned into weeks, but the unsettling feeling of being watched never truly left. Rachel and I tried to move on, to resume our lives, but something had shifted within me. The woods, the strangers, the ever-present feeling of being followed, it haunted me. It wasn't just paranoia. It was as if they were still there, lurking in the background, waiting. I couldn't shake it. I started doing some research online, looking up anything that might explain the strange events, but nothing I found felt right. No reports of missing hikers, no strange occurrences in the area, nothing that could explain what we had experienced. I even looked up the strange figures from the woods, but there was nothing, no trace of them online. It was as if they didn't exist. But the more I searched, the more I found myself spiraling. I became obsessed. I checked the locks, the windows, every corner of the apartment. I started carrying a pocket knife with me, convinced that one of those strangers would find a way inside. Every night I checked the parking lot from the balcony, peering into the shadows, waiting for them to appear. But they never did. One night, as I was sitting on the balcony, staring into the night, I heard a faint noise behind me. I froze. I didn't need to turn around. I knew it was Rachel, but something in my gut told me not to acknowledge her. I kept my eyes trained on the parking lot, but from the corner of my vision, I saw her step into the living room. She'd been quiet lately, ever since I started obsessing over the events. I could see the concern on her face, but also something else. Exhaustion. She walked over to me and sat down beside me, her voice soft as she spoke. "You need to let it go, you know." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind kept racing, my thoughts tangled in knots. "Look," she continued, her voice full of gentle frustration. "I know you're scared, but this—" She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "This isn't helping us. We're fine. We're safe." Her words should have comforted me, but they didn't. Instead, they made me feel like I was losing control of something deeper. That night, after Rachel fell asleep, I couldn't help myself. I grabbed my keys and decided to go for a drive. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get out of the apartment. The darkness of the city streets felt like a better alternative than the quiet of the apartment that had begun to feel too small. As I drove, I found myself heading back toward the woods. The familiar feeling of unease settled in my stomach, but this time, I didn't turn back. I parked near the trailhead, unsure why I'd come back here, but feeling a strange sense of closure that I hadn't felt in weeks. I walked down the trail, the soft crunch of leaves beneath my feet the only sound in the dead of night. The forest was silent, just like it had been the first time we walked through it. For a long time I stood there, breathing in the cold air, waiting. But nothing happened. The strange figures didn't appear. The oppressive feeling of being followed didn't return. I had come here expecting to see them, expecting to confront my fear, but there was only quiet. I realized then what I had been afraid of all this time. It wasn't the strangers or their silent pursuit. It wasn't the fear of being chased or watched. What had terrified me was the idea that I couldn't escape my own mind. The anxiety, the paranoia, the constant wondering if I was truly losing touch with reality. But standing there in the woods, I realized something important. They had never been following me. I had been following them. They had always been one step behind. Not because they were hunting me, but because I was the one who couldn't let go of them. My mind had twisted the experience into something darker than it ever was, building it up until it felt like a constant presence in my life. But in the end, they had never shown any aggression, never made a move against me. They were just people, strange, yes, but not a threat. And that realization was all I needed. I went home, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Rachel was still asleep when I returned, her soft breathing the only sound in the apartment. I quietly crawled into bed beside her, feeling the tension slowly drain from my body. The next morning I felt different, calmer. I knew it would take time to truly let go of the fear, but I had faced it head on, and that was enough. The strangers, the woods, the paranoia, it was all part of the journey, but it wasn't something I would let control me anymore. We didn't go back to the woods. I didn't feel the need to. But for the first time since that strange encounter, I felt at peace. The lingering fear had faded into the past. Sometimes, the only thing that follows you is the fear you hold on to. And in the end, it's up to you whether or not you let it define you. I met him when I was 8 years old. At first, there was nothing unusual about him, just another kid in the neighborhood. His name was Darren, and he had this quiet, almost still way of carrying himself, like he was always listening but never truly present. We became friends because, at that age, friendship is simple. You live close, you play together, and that's all there is to it. But looking back now, I realize there were signs, things that should have made me run the other way. Like the way he never seemed afraid of anything, or the way he smiled whenever something got hurt. I remember the first time I saw that look on his face. We were 10, playing in the woods behind my house when Darren spotted a bird with a broken wing. It was small, helpless, twitching on the ground. I wanted to help it, to take it home, maybe tell my mom. Darren just stared. Then, before I could stop him, he picked up a rock and smashed it down. The bird squealed once, then went silent. I froze. Darren, what the hell? He looked at me, tilting his head like I had asked something strange. It was already gonna die. I felt sick. I wanted to run home, to get away from him. But he just stood there, completely unbothered. That should have been the moment I realized something was wrong with him. But I was a kid, and kids don't always understand danger when it's staring them in the face. So I stayed friends with Darren. And over the years, things only got worse. As we got older, Darren's fascination with things he shouldn't do only grew. At first it was little things. Stealing candy from the store, sneaking into places we weren't supposed to be. But there was always something off about the way he did it. He never stole because he wanted something. He stole because he liked the thrill of taking it. He liked knowing he could get away with it, and when he didn't, he never looked guilty. I remember the time he got caught pocketing a lighter at the gas station. The clerk grabbed his wrist, threatened to call the cops, and while I stood there panicked, Darren just stared at him. Not angry, not scared, just watching, like he was waiting to see what the man would do next. The guy let him go with a warning, and as soon as we walked out, Darren smiled. Voila, it was bluffing, he said, like it was a game. Then there was the incident with the neighborhood cat. Fluffy little thing, belonged to this old lady down the street. One day it went missing. Posters went up, people searched, but no one found a trace. Except I did. Or at least, I found Darren sitting behind his garage with a knife, his hands dirty, something half buried in the dirt. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to know. But I remember the way he looked at me when he noticed I was there. Like he wasn't ashamed, wasn't guilty, just curious about what I'd do next. I wish I had told someone then. Maybe if I had, things wouldn't have gone as far as they did. By the time we hit high school, I started pulling away from Darren. He wasn't just a weird kid anymore, he was dangerous. The way he talked about people was unsettling, like they were nothing more than objects. He could be charming when he wanted to be, though. He had a way of making teachers love him, convincing people to do things for him, making girls think he actually cared about them. But I knew better. I had seen the way he enjoyed hurting things, the way he only ever seemed truly alive when he was causing chaos. I didn't want to be around for whatever he had planned next. And then one night I got a call. It was late, sometime past midnight, and my phone buzzed on my nightstand. I groggily grabbed it, squinting at the screen. It was Darren. He never called. He wasn't the type to need people. Something in my gut told me not to answer, but I did anyway. "Hello?" My voice was thick with sleep. There was silence for a moment, just static and breathing. Then, in a calm, almost casual tone, he said, "I did something bad." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" Another pause. Then, barely above a whisper, "I need your help." I sat up, suddenly wide awake. Every instinct told me to hang up, to not get involved. But Darren had a way of pulling people in, making you feel like you had to do what he wanted. Against my better judgment, I asked, "Where are you?" "Come to the old train tracks, near the woods." Then he hung up. I stared at my phone, heart pounding. I should have gone back to sleep. I should have ignored it. But something about his voice, the calmness of it, unsettled me. I got dressed, grabbed my bike, and rode out. The train tracks were abandoned, stretching through the woods like a forgotten scar. The night was cold, my breath visible in the air as I pedaled faster, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. When I got there, Darren was standing near the edge of the trees, hands in his pockets, completely still. The way he stood there, waiting, sent a chill through me. I got off my bike and took a hesitant step forward. "What's going on?" He turned, and that's when I saw it. Behind him, half hidden in the brush, was a body. For the sake of privacy, I won't be using real names. Even now, years later, I don't know if he's still out there. I don't know if he ever got caught. But if he is, I don't want my name tied to any of this. I'll call him Darren. And the person lying in the dirt that night, I won't give them a name at all. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the body. My brain refused to accept what I was looking at. It didn't seem real, the way the limbs were twisted, the way the face was turned just slightly away from me, just enough so I didn't have to look them in the eye. I swallowed hard. "Darren? What did you do?" He tilted his head, watching my reaction with that same eerie curiosity I'd seen in him since we were kids. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he muttered, his tone almost casual, like he was talking about a broken toy, not a dead person. I took a step back, my mind screaming at me to run, but Darren just sighed. "Look, I didn't call you to freak out. I called you because I need your help." I shook my head. No, I'm not." He took a step closer. I could barely see him in the dim light, but I could feel the weight of his stare. "You are going to help me, unless you want to be just as guilty as I am." My stomach twisted. Guilty. That word clung to me like tar, thick and suffocating. I hadn't done anything, but I was here, wasn't I? I was standing next to a body in the middle of the woods, the only other person around being a guy I had known for years, a guy I had ignored the warning signs about. And just like that, I realized he had planned this. Not the killing, maybe, but calling me, making sure I was involved, making sure I couldn't just walk away. That part was on purpose. I was trapped. My whole body was screaming at me to turn around and run, but my legs wouldn't move. I kept staring at the body, my mind desperately trying to convince itself that this wasn't real, that maybe it was some kind of sick joke, but it wasn't. The air smelled like iron, the dirt beneath the body looked dark and wet, and Darren, if that was even the name I should be using, stood there, watching me, waiting. My voice caught in my throat. "I don't know what you expect me to do." Darren sighed, almost like he was disappointed in me. I expected you to not be such a little bitch about this. He turned and kicked the dirt near the body, shifting some of the leaves over it. We need to move it. There's a creek not far from here. That was it. That was the moment I realized he wasn't panicked. He wasn't regretting anything. He was calm. He had already thought this through. I took another step back, feeling my breath quicken. I'm not helping you. Darren's jaw clenched, but he didn't move toward me. He just tilted his head slightly, like he was analyzing me, running through his next move. That's what always unsettled me about him. He didn't react like a normal person. He calculated. He weighed his options. And right now, I was one of those options. You really want to go to the cops? His voice was quiet, almost amused. You think they'll believe you had nothing to do with it? I swallowed hard. I hadn't done anything, but the truth was, I wasn't sure. We had been friends for years. I had ignored so many red flags. Who would believe that I just happened to get a call in the middle of the night and showed up next to a dead body with no involvement? I didn't answer. Darren took that as hesitation, and he pounced on it. I called you first. Your phone's going to show you were here. You ran with me when we used to steal shit as kids. People saw us together all the time. I tell them you were here when it happened? That we planned this together? He smiled. I guarantee you they believe me over you. I felt sick. I could barely hear anything over the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. Darren had put me in checkmate before I even knew we were playing a game. I had two choices, help him or find a way out. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing in circles. I could feel the sweat building at the back of my neck, my hands clammy and shaking. Darren's words echoed in my head, and for a moment, I truly believed I had no choice. But then something clicked, a sudden sharp clarity, like a light bulb flickering on in the dark. I did have a choice. I could walk away, I could run, I could scream, but I had to do something before this all spiraled further. I swallowed, took a deep breath, and said, I'm leaving. Darren's eyes narrowed, and I saw something flicker in them. Anger, maybe even a flash of disbelief. He stepped closer to me, but I didn't back down. I met his gaze, and for the first time in years, I didn't flinch. You think you're just going to walk away from this? His voice was low, cold. You're with me or you're against me. That's how this works. I shook my head, my mind racing to find a way out, a way to end this without being caught up in any more of his madness. My fingers fumbled in my pocket, reaching for my phone, the small, hidden device I had switched off earlier because I knew Darren was smart enough to check if I was recording. The minute I pulled it out, though, Darren's eyes locked on it. He lunged toward me, but I was already pressing the emergency 911 button, and before he could grab me, the call connected. Help! I shouted, my voice shaky. I'm with someone. I'm in danger. Please, someone, help! Darren froze. He didn't yell. He didn't run. He just stared, as if for the first time in his life something was out of his control. It didn't matter. The dispatcher had already heard enough. The sirens came within minutes. I don't know what happened to Darren after that. I was taken to the station where I gave my statement using a fake name for my own safety. The body in the woods was identified, and Darren was arrested hours later. There were no charges I could be tied to, no evidence that I had helped him. But I didn't trust the system. I couldn't. I packed up my things soon after and moved away. The memories of Darren, his calm smile, his twisted sense of control, still haunt me. Even now I keep my distance from people like him. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, but more than that, I wonder how many other people he's convinced to do his bidding. Because someone like Darren, he doesn't stop until he gets what he wants. I don't know where to start with this, but I can say for certain that I'll never live alone again. This happened about 6 months ago, and I still can't sleep without checking the vents in every room. I still can't walk into my apartment without scanning the ceiling, looking for any signs that something or someone has been there. Even now, just typing this out makes my hands shake. For context, I had just moved into my new apartment a few months before everything started. I'd gotten out of a long-term relationship, and for the first time in years, I wanted a space that was entirely my own. It was a small, one-bedroom unit in a decently nice neighborhood just outside of Seattle. Not a luxury apartment by any means, but cozy. The kind of place where you could hear your neighbors through the walls if they were being too loud, but otherwise it was quiet. That's what I liked about it. Just enough life around me to feel safe, but still peaceful enough to feel like home. I lived on the second floor, and because the building was older, the vents were huge. Not the tiny little slits you see in newer apartments, but the large metal grates, big enough that I could have easily stuck my whole arm inside. They weren't just in the ceiling either. There was one directly on the wall in my bedroom, another in the hallway, and one in the living room near the floor. I didn't think much of it at the time, other than how obnoxiously big they were. I should have thought more about them. It started with little things. I remember the first night I noticed it, because I was lying in bed, exhausted, half asleep, when I heard it. A soft, scratching sound. It wasn't loud, just barely audible over the hum of my ceiling fan. It wasn't even consistent, just a few small noises here and there coming from the vent on my bedroom wall. I remember thinking it was probably just the building settling, or maybe the wind hitting it at a weird angle. But then I heard it again, a faint shuffling. It was so soft that I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. I got up, turned on my bedside lamp, and stared at the vent for a while. It was pitch black behind the metal grate. No movement, no sound. After a few minutes, I shook it off and went back to sleep. The next morning, I forgot about it. For the next few weeks, the noises became something I just got used to. I convinced myself it was mice, maybe even a rat. I knew the idea should have grossed me out, but I figured, what else could it be? The building was old. Maybe the vents were connected to the basement, and some rodents had made their way in. I even called my landlord about it, but she brushed me off, saying they had regular pest control inspections, and I was probably just hearing the pipes. Fine, whatever. It wasn't a big deal. At least not at first. Then, things started moving. It was subtle. Small things at first. A cup that I knew I had left on the counter would be in the sink. My keys wouldn't be where I swore I had put them. My blankets looked slightly rumpled when I got home, like someone had been sitting on my bed. Again, I told myself it was just me being absent-minded. Maybe I was adjusting to living alone for the first time. I'd always lived with someone before, so maybe I was just noticing things more. Then one night I woke up to my closet door open. I went back the next morning convinced I'd overreacted. Maybe it really was just a trick of the light. Maybe I'd let my nerves get the best of me. That's what I told myself as I unlocked my door, heart pounding in my chest. The apartment looked the same, nothing out of place. The vent in the living room was secure, no signs of anything being disturbed. I stood there for a long time, just staring at it. Then finally I laughed, a nervous, shaky laugh. I had freaked out over nothing. But the feeling didn't go away. The air still felt off, stagnant, heavy, like someone had been breathing in it all night. I shook it off and went about my day, trying to ignore the irrational feeling that someone was watching me. That night I locked my bedroom door. I had never done that before, but something told me I needed to. I told myself it was just to help me sleep better. Around 3 a.m. I woke up to a sound. A long, slow creak. My closet door. I wasn't imagining it this time. I could hear it moving. I went back the next morning, convinced I'd overreacted. Maybe it really was just a trick of the light. Maybe I'd let my nerves get the best of me. That's what I told myself as I unlocked my door, heart pounding in my chest. The apartment looked the same, nothing out of place. The vent in the living room was secure, no signs of anything being disturbed. I stood there for a long time, just staring at it. Then finally I laughed, a nervous, shaky laugh. I had freaked out over nothing. But the feeling didn't go away. The air still felt off, stagnant, heavy, like someone had been breathing in it all night. I shook it off and went about my day, trying to ignore the irrational feeling that someone was watching me. That night I locked my bedroom door. I had never done that before, but something told me I needed to. I told myself it was just to help me sleep better. Around 3 a.m. I woke up to a sound. A long, slow creak. My closet door. I wasn't imagining it this time. I could hear it moving. I lay frozen in bed, my body stiff with terror as I listened. My breath was shallow, barely daring to move. I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself that maybe I had left a window open, that a draft had pushed it slightly. But my brain kept screaming, "You locked the windows. You locked everything." The door creaked again. This time it was louder, more deliberate. I had to look. Slowly, I turned my head toward the closet. The door was open. Not wide, just a few inches, but it had been closed when I went to bed. My stomach turned. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I gripped the sheets so tightly my fingers ached. I wanted to move, to run, but my body refused to cooperate. Then I heard it. A faint, barely audible shuffling sound, coming from inside the closet. It wasn't loud, just the softest movement, like fabric brushing against something. It could have been the building settling, I told myself. Could have been anything. But then, I heard something that made my blood turn to ice. Breathing. It was faint, slow, controlled, but it was there. Someone was in my closet, hiding, watching me. I nearly screamed, but I clamped my hand over my mouth just in time. I forced myself to stay quiet, my body shaking as I slowly reached for my phone on the nightstand. My fingers trembled as I tried to unlock it, my mind racing with 1,000 panicked thoughts. And then the breathing stopped. Silence. Complete and utter silence. Like whoever or whatever was inside had realized I was awake. I stopped moving, my thumb hovering over the emergency call button. I listened. Nothing. For a full minute, maybe 2, I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just listened. And then, from inside the closet, tap, tap, tap. I lost it. I shot up, bolting out of bed so fast that I nearly tripped over my own feet. I fumbled for the doorknob, yanking it open and sprinting down the hall. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I just ran straight out of my apartment, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for air, my fingers still clenched around my phone. I wasn't thinking anymore. I just dialed 911. I could barely get the words out. My voice shook so badly that the operator had to ask me to repeat myself 3 times before she understood me. Someone's in my apartment. The cops showed up fast. I guess my panic must have made them take me seriously this time, because 2 officers were already pulling into the lot within minutes. I stood there, shivering in the cold, my arms wrapped around myself as they went inside. I expected them to come back out within minutes, saying they'd found nothing, that I was imagining things. That's what I had prepared myself for. But they didn't. They were inside for a long time, longer than I expected. And when they finally came out, the look on the older officer's face made my stomach drop. "You said you live alone?" he asked. I nodded, my throat dry. He glanced at his partner before turning back to me. "We found something." I felt like I couldn't breathe. The officer hesitated, then gestured for me to follow. My legs felt like lead as I stepped forward, my entire body numb with fear. They led me back up to my apartment. The door was still open, the hallway light spilling into the darkness. I could barely bring myself to step inside. The younger officer pointed to the hallway vent. It was open. The screws had been completely removed, the grate pulled away. And next to it, sitting just outside the vent, was a small pile of objects. My missing house keys, a half-empty water bottle, a candy wrapper I didn't recognize. But the worst part? A t-shirt. A men's t-shirt. Worn, dirty, not mine. I felt sick. The officer's voice was low when he spoke again. "We checked the ducts." I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to know. But he told me anyway. "The vents are big enough for someone to crawl through." We found signs that someone's been living in there. I must have swayed because the younger officer reached out, steadying me. "Do you know anyone who might have access to your apartment?" the older cop asked. I shook my head. I had no idea who could have been inside. But deep down, something inside me already knew. Whoever it was, they'd been watching me, listening, living inside my walls. The cops didn't find him that night, but that meant one thing. He was still out there, somewhere, and I had no idea for when he was coming back. I didn't go back inside that night. I couldn't. The police had searched every inch of my apartment, but their search had one major flaw: they didn't find him. And if they didn't find him, that meant he could be anywhere. I spent the night at my friend Megan's place. She was the only person I felt comfortable calling that late, though even as I stood in her doorway, shivering, my hands still shaking from adrenaline, I could tell she thought I was overreacting. "You're sure it wasn't just some squatter who got in once and left?" she asked, handing me a blanket. I barely even heard her. I was too busy checking the vents in her apartment, my paranoia now inescapable. "I'm not staying there," I muttered. Megan sighed. "Look, I get it. It's terrifying. But the cops didn't find anyone. Maybe he got scared and left when he realized you called them." I really did, but something in my gut told me she was wrong. Megan let me crash on her couch. I didn't sleep. Every single noise made my skin crawl. Every creak of the apartment above, every distant hum of the air vents kicking on. I flinched at everything. I couldn't stop thinking about the shirt. It had been dirty, crumpled, like it had been worn recently. That meant the person in my vents wasn't just hiding there. They were living there. How long? How long had they been inside my walls? Had they been there since I moved in? Since the day I brought my things inside and thought I was alone? Had they been watching me sleep? I could have thrown up just thinking about it. The next morning, I called my landlord. I didn't even let her talk before I launched into my story, my voice shaking as I demanded she change my locks. She sighed heavily, like I was being dramatic. "The police already checked and they didn't find anything. You said it yourself. There was someone in my vents. Then they're gone now, aren't they?" She refused to take me seriously. I don't know if she thought I was lying or just trying to get out of my lease, but by the end of the conversation, it was clear she wasn't going to do a damn thing. That's when I knew. I had to get out of that apartment. I started looking for a new place that same day. I didn't care about breaking my lease. I didn't care about losing my security deposit. I just needed out. That night, I went back to my apartment for the first time since calling the police. Megan came with me honestly. I don't think I would have gone alone. Walking in felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy, like stepping into a place I didn't belong anymore. I had only come to grab my essentials clothes, toiletries, my work laptop. I wasn't planning to stay. I kept my movements quick, stuffing things into bags as fast as I could. I refused to look at the vents. Then Megan asked, "Did you leave that open?" I turned. She was staring at my bedroom closet. The door was open, only a few inches just like before. My stomach dropped. I had locked it before I left. I knew I had. My fingers clenched around the strap of my bag. "We're leaving." Megan looked at me, eyes widening. "Don't you want to check number?" I grabbed my bags and practically shoved her out the door. I didn't even bother locking it behind me. I didn't care anymore. We got back to her place, and Megan finally stopped arguing with me. I think, for the first time, she actually believed me. I spent the next few days looking for a new apartment. I didn't go back, not even to pack more things. I just left. Then, 4 days later, I got a call from my landlord. "You're moving out?" she asked. "Yeah," I said flatly. She let out an annoyed sigh. "You could have at least told me instead of abandoning your unit." I didn't respond. She was quiet for a moment. Then her tone shifted. "Well, I'm glad you weren't there last night." My breath caught. "Why?" There was another pause. Then finally she spoke. "The downstairs neighbor called the cops. She heard noises coming from your apartment." My throat went dry. She said it sounded like someone moving around. I felt like I was going to be sick. "She thought maybe you had come back, but when the cops got there, they found the place empty." "What are you saying?" Another pause. "When they checked, the front door was locked," she said. "But the vent in your living room was open." I couldn't breathe. "They think whoever it was came back." I felt dizzy. My ears were ringing. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "They also found something in your closet." Eyes. "What?" Another beat of silence. "A blanket and some empty water bottles." My pulse stopped, like someone had been sleeping there. I hung up the phone. I sat there, staring at the floor, my hands trembling so violently that my entire body shook with them. The reality of it hit me all at once. I never went back to that apartment, not even once. I didn't care about my furniture, my security deposit, or the things I left behind. Nothing was worth stepping foot in that place again, knowing what had been inside with me. At first, I tried to convince myself that moving away would fix things, that once I was in a new apartment, a new city, a new life, I'd feel safe again. But I didn't. I moved in with Megan for a while, trying to get my footing. She did her best to make me feel comfortable, but I could tell she was worried about me. I wasn't sleeping. I barely ate. Every night, I lay awake in the darkness, my ears tuned to the silence, my eyes locked on the air vent across the room. I knew it was empty. I had checked it 100 times. But that didn't stop me from imagining him in there, waiting, watching, breathing. I couldn't take it anymore. A week after I left the apartment for good, I went to the police station. I didn't know what I expected, I just wanted answers. I wanted to know if they had found him. The officer at the front desk recognized me immediately. I could tell by the way his face shifted, his polite expression faltering for just a second before he forced it back into place. "Ma'am," he said, clearing his throat, "you're the one, wow, from the apartment?" "Yes." My voice came out hoarse. I hadn't spoken much in days. He nodded and glanced at his computer, typing something in. I watched his eyes scan the screen. Then, slowly, he looked back up at me. "There was an investigation," he said carefully. "But the suspect hasn't been identified." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" He exhaled through his nose, clearly choosing his words. "We found evidence that someone had been living in the vents, but we have no leads on who they were." I felt a sickening wave of nausea. "So, he's still out there?" The officer hesitated. "We don't have any reason to believe he's still in the building. He could have been a transient someone, using the ventilation system to move between units. He may have left once he realized the police were involved." I wanted to believe that, but something inside me knew it wasn't that simple. Still, the conversation ended there. No suspect, no arrest, no closure. I went back to Megan's that night and sat in the dark for a long time, staring at the ceiling. My body wouldn't stop shaking. If they hadn't found him, if they hadn't identified him, that meant he was still out there. I tried to move on. I finally found a new place, a small studio in a newer building, with sealed air vents and no crawl spaces. The very first thing I did before signing the lease was inspect every wall, every corner, every possible hiding space. Still, the paranoia followed me. For months, I checked my closets every single night before bed. I lined the vents with furniture, even though I knew there was no space behind them for anyone to hide. I didn't sleep well, ever. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was letting my fear control me. But some fears aren't irrational. Some fears are born from reality. 6 months later, I got a call from a different police department. It was early, too early, the kind of call that immediately makes your stomach drop before you even answer. The voice on the other end was serious, Is this my name? I sat up in bed, gripping my phone. Yes? The next sentence made my blood run cold. We have a man in custody. We believe he may be connected to your case. I sat there silent. My brain couldn't process what I had just heard. The officer continued, "Do you have time to come in for a statement?" I don't remember responding. I don't remember getting dressed. I just remember sitting in that cold, sterile interrogation room, shaking so badly that I could barely hold the cup of coffee they handed me. "We arrested him last night," the detective told me. "Caught him trying to break into an apartment across town." I swallowed hard. "He's been doing this for a while," the detective continued. "Moving from place to place, living inside buildings without being noticed." My voice came out in a whisper. "Who is he?" The detective slid a mugshot across the table. I forced myself to look. The man in the photo was young, mid-30s maybe, thin, almost sickly looking, with sunken eyes and messy, unkempt hair. Not a monster, not a deformed, shadowy figure lurking in the darkness. Just a man. Oh, that made it worse. "He's been doing this for years," the detective said grimly. "We found evidence that he had been living in multiple apartments across the city, sometimes for months at a time." I felt my stomach lurch. "How did he get inside?" The detective's expression darkened. "Through the vents, just like in your case." I wanted to throw up. "He admitted to watching people," the detective continued. "He never interacted, never made contact, but he listened." I couldn't breathe. He said he liked the feeling of being there, without them knowing. I shot up from my seat, my chair scraping against the floor. "I need to leave." The detective didn't stop me. He just nodded. "I understand. That was a year ago. He's in prison now. That should make me feel safe. It should make me feel like I can finally breathe again. But sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I swear I still hear it. The soft scratching sound, the faint shuffling. Sometimes I wake up and feel like I'm being watched. Like there's something just out of sight, lurking in the shadows. I check the vents every night, even though I know I don't have to. Even though I know he's locked away. Because the truth is, I don't think I'll ever feel safe again. Not completely. Because for a long time, I had never been alone. I had just thought I was. And that's what haunts me the most. Hi, my name is Jake, and I love to camp. I always have ever since I was a kid. There's something about being out in the wilderness. No traffic, no buzzing lights, no constant flood of information demanding my attention. Just the sound of the wind moving through the trees, the distant call of an owl, and the steady crackle of a fire keeping the dark at bay. I do most of my camping alone. Not because I don't have friends, I do. But there's something different about being out there by yourself. You become more aware of your surroundings. Every rustling branch, every snap of a twig, it all means something. In the city, you can ignore background noise. Out there, you listen. I've done solo hikes all over the country, from national parks to deep remote forests where I wouldn't see another human for miles. I know how to handle myself. I follow all the rules. Let someone know where I'm going. Bring extra supplies. Stay on map trails. I've never been the type to get scared easily. Until now, I don't know how to explain what happened, but I need to get it out. Maybe writing it down will help me make sense of it. Or maybe someone out there has experienced the same thing. Because I can't be the only one. I went out on this trip about a month ago. It was supposed to be a quick 3-day solo camp in an area I'd been to before. A dense stretch of forest about 4 hours from the nearest town. The place was quiet, isolated, and peaceful, perfect. I parked my car at the trailhead around noon, slung my pack over my shoulders, and started the 5-mile hike to the spot I'd picked. It wasn't an official campsite, just a clearing I'd found on a previous trip, tucked away by a small, slow-moving creek. The hike in was uneventful. I passed maybe one other person, a guy heading back toward the trailhead. He gave me a polite nod, but didn't stop to talk. That was the last person I saw. By the time I reached the clearing, the sun was dipping lower, the sky turning that soft, dusky blue that signals the start of the night. I made quick work of setting up my tent, gathering some firewood and heating up a quick meal. As the fire crackled in front of me, I felt that familiar sense of peace settle in. Nothing but the trees, the stars, and the distant hoot of an owl somewhere in the canopy. That first night I slept like a rock. It was the next morning that I knew something was wrong. I woke up early, the cold biting at my skin. The first thing I noticed was how unnaturally quiet the forest was. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. Then I saw my backpack. It was open, not just unzipped, completely pulled apart. At first I panicked, thinking an animal had gotten into my things, but nothing was missing. Not my food, not my water, not even the jerky I had left out by mistake. The only things that had been touched were my map, my knife, and my notebook. They had been pulled out and left sitting on top of my sleeping bag. I felt my stomach tighten. Had I done that? Maybe I'd rummaged through my pack during the night, half asleep? That's what I told myself. Then I stepped outside my tent and saw the footprints. Not mine. Another set. Larger. Heavier. Circling my tent. Not approaching, not leaving, just circling. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I crouched down to examine them, my fingers hovering just above the indentations in the dirt. Fresh. They hadn't been there the night before. A sudden wave of unease rolled through me. Someone had been here. Someone had walked around my tent while I was sleeping. My first instinct was to rationalize. Maybe the guy I passed on the way in had changed his mind and come back. Maybe a park ranger had been checking the area. But no. No one hikes this deep into the woods just to walk in circles around a stranger's tent and leave without a word. I scanned the trees, suddenly feeling exposed. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't alone. I tried to shake it off. It was early morning. The logical thing to do was pack up and leave. I could cut my trip short, call it bad luck, and get back to my car before noon. But something inside me rebelled against that idea. I had been camping alone for years. I wasn't about to let some unexplained footprints send me packing. So I forced myself to go about my day as planned. But I kept my knife within reach just in case. The second night was worse. I had spent the whole day trying to convince myself it was nothing, that the footprints could have been there before I arrived, that maybe I had been too groggy to remember if I had unzipped my pack. But as soon as the sun started to set, that feeling crept back in, that nagging, suffocating sense of being watched. I kept my fire going longer than usual. Normally I let it die down before I turn in, but that night I kept feeding it, listening to the way the flames crackled in the dark, listening for anything else. By the time I forced myself to crawl into my tent, my body was tense with exhaustion. I closed my eyes, gripping my knife beneath my sleeping bag, my ears straining for any sound beyond the wind in the trees. At some point I drifted off. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but I remember exactly what I saw. The walls of my tent were illuminated from the fire's dying embers, casting a faint glow against the fabric. And there just outside was a shadow, tall, motionless, standing right beside my tent. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just lay there, paralyzed, feeling my pulse hammering in my skull. The shadow didn't shift, didn't speak. It just stood there, watching. My fingers clenched tighter around my knife, my entire body locked in fear. Then, a slow, deliberate scraping sound against the fabric of my tent, and a voice, low, whispering, "Why are you still here?" I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The voice had been so close, like someone had been standing just inches from my tent, whispering directly to me through the fabric. I felt my entire body coil like a spring, every muscle locked in place. The scraping sound came again slow, deliberate, like something dragging a fingertip across the thin nylon of my tent. I wanted to move. I wanted to burst out, knife in hand, ready to fight if I had to. But I couldn't. because I knew that if I unzipped that tent, if I looked outside, I would see something I wasn't supposed to see. Something that shouldn't be there. My grip tightened around the handle of my knife, my knuckles aching. The fire outside had burned down to embers, and the only thing separating me from whoever or whatever was out there was a thin layer of fabric. Then silence. No footsteps, no rustling leaves. Just nothing. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. Still nothing. Was it gone? I listened harder, trying to hear over the frantic beating of my heart. And then, just when I thought the nightmare was over, a deep, guttural exhale, right next to my ear. A low, rasping breath, like someone was leaning down, pressing their mouth against the side of my tent, inches from my head. I couldn't take it anymore. I moved. Fast. I lunged for the zipper, yanking it open in one sharp motion. My knife was already raised as I burst out of the tent, ready to fight. But there was no one there. The clearing was empty. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, the moon casting pale silver light across the ground. My fire had burned down to glowing embers, sending soft flickering shadows dancing across the surrounding trunks. I turned in a full circle, my breath coming in short gasps. Nothing. No footprints in the dirt, no rustling in the bushes, no sign that anyone had been there at all. But I knew what I had heard. I knew. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat by the fire, feeding it small branches, staring into the trees, waiting. Nothing happened. No more whispers, no more shadows moving between the trees. But I felt it. That pressure in the air, that undeniable weight of being watched. And that was worse than anything else. When the first light of dawn finally broke through the canopy, I made a decision. I was leaving. I packed my things quickly, stuffing my gear into my pack without bothering to organize it. My hands were still shaking as I collapsed my tent, rolling it up in a messy bundle and shoving it into its sack. I wasn't taking my time. I wasn't staying a second longer than I had to. By the time I started down the trail, the sun was fully up, but it didn't make me feel any better. The forest felt wrong. It wasn't just that I was shaken. It wasn't just fear. Something about the air itself felt different, like I had stepped into a place I was never meant to be. I kept moving. I was 3 miles into the hike back when I saw the first tree. I almost missed it. I had been walking fast, head down, focused on just getting out. But something made me stop. A tree just off the path. Carved into the bark was a word. Leaving? My stomach dropped. I took a step back, staring at it, my breath caught in my throat. The cuts in the bark looked fresh, like they hadn't even begun to heal over yet. I spun in a full circle, scanning the forest around me. Nothing. No movement, no sounds. Just that same crushing silence. I wanted to believe the carving had been there before, that I had just missed it on the way in. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Someone or something had carved it during the night, while I was still at camp, and they had known I would find it. I started walking again, faster this time. I wasn't running, not yet, but I wasn't stopping either. I told myself that if I could just get to the car, everything would be fine. I was 2 miles out when I saw the second tree. I almost didn't look. I didn't want to look. But my eyes flicked to it anyway, and I felt my chest tighten. Another carving. Come back. My hands felt clammy, my pulse a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I forced my legs to keep moving. 1 mile. Just 1 more mile. I kept my eyes forward, pushing my body into a near jog. I didn't stop. Didn't slow down. And then I saw the third tree, and this time I couldn't stop myself from stumbling to a halt. The carving was lower on the trunk, slashed deep into the bark. Why did you look? I felt like I was going to be sick, because that meant whoever had done this knew. They knew I had woken up that night. They knew I had seen the shadow, had heard the whisper, and they were taunting me. I turned, finally giving in to the urge to run. I sprinted down the trail, my pack bouncing against my back, my breath burning in my chest. I could see the clearing up ahead, the break in the trees where my car was parked. I forced myself to go faster, and then just before I broke through the trees, I heard it. A voice. Clear, loud, from somewhere too close. Come back. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I just ran. I didn't slow down until I was in my car, the doors locked, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I sat there for a long time, trying to catch my breath. Listening. Waiting. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of the engine, the rustling of leaves in the wind. I started the car and drove. Didn't look back. Didn't stop. And I told myself I would never go back to that place. It's been weeks since that trip. I haven't been able to sleep right since. Every night I wake up at random hours, heart racing, that whisper still lingering in my ears. Come back. I don't know what I saw out there. I don't know who or what was in those woods with me. But I know one thing. They weren't human. And they never wanted me to leave. I didn't go back to the woods. Not for weeks. I told myself I wouldn't. That I had learned my lesson. That whatever had been out there, whoever had carved those messages, wasn't something I wanted to understand. But no matter how much I tried to forget, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The whispers followed me home. Not literally, never heard them in my apartment, never found carvings in my door, never saw shadows standing outside my window, but in my head, they never stopped. I kept waking up at random hours of the night, heart pounding, expecting to see something standing in the corner of my bedroom. I checked my closet more times than I'd like to admit. Every noise outside made my stomach tighten. The worst part? I wasn't scared of the woods. I was scared that whatever it was, had followed me. But it hadn't. Not yet. And that's what made it worse. A month after the trip, I started dreaming about it. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the memory of those trees etched into my vision, like I had been there again, standing among them, feeling that same unnatural silence pressing in. In the dream, I was always back at my campsite. The fire had burned out. The woods were too dark, and I wasn't alone. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them, the same way you feel someone staring at you from across a room. A presence, standing just behind me, watching, waiting, and then, always the whisper. Why did you look? I'd wake up gasping, gripping my sheets, my heart hammering like I had just sprinted a mile. No matter what I did, no matter how much I tried to shake it, I couldn't get the woods out of my head. It wasn't over, and I knew what I had to do. I went back, not to stay, not to camp, just to prove to myself that nothing was there, that it had all been in my head. That's what I told myself anyway. The drive to the trailhead felt different this time. The first time I had come, I had been excited, at peace, ready to be alone in nature. This time, I felt like I was walking into a crime scene, like I was trespassing somewhere I didn't belong. I parked my car and hesitated for a long time, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I got out. The trail was the same as before, but it wasn't. The trees felt closer together. The sky looked duller, the air somehow thicker. I moved quickly, my pulse in my ears. I wasn't going to hike all the way back to the campsite, I just needed to check something. The carvings. If they were still there, then I hadn't imagined it. If they were gone, then maybe, just maybe, I could convince myself it had all been in my head. I made it to the first tree. My stomach twisted into knots. The carving was still there. Leaving? The letters were deeper now. The bark around them was blackened, like they had been burned into the tree instead of carved. I swallowed hard, my fingers clenching at my sides. I moved faster. I found the second tree. Come back. The lettering looked new, like it had been carved again recently. My skin prickled. I almost turned back, almost ran for the car. But I had to see the last tree. I had to know. I followed the path until I saw it, the final message, the one that had sent me running for my life. And when I saw what was carved into the bark, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the same message. It wasn't "Why did you look?" It was my name. Jake. I felt like my entire body had turned to ice. This wasn't a trick of my mind. This wasn't some prank or illusion. Something out here knew who I was. And I had just walked straight back into its territory. I spun around, my breath ragged, scanning the trees. Nothing. But I felt it. That same unnatural stillness, that same heavy, watching presence. I wasn't alone. I took a step back, then another. I turned and walked as fast as I could without breaking into a full sprint. I didn't look back. The entire way back to the car, I could feel it, something just beyond my vision, lurking in the trees. Waiting. I reached my car and yanked the door open, slamming it shut behind me, locking it in one frantic motion. I sat there, hands gripping the wheel, my chest heaving. I had my proof. And I knew, without a doubt, I was never coming back. I started the engine and pulled out, my tires kicking up dust as I sped down the road. Only when I was miles away, with the forest nothing but a shadow in my rearview mirror, did I finally let myself breathe. It was over. Whatever was out there, whatever had whispered to me in the dark, it had let me go. I wasn't going to push my luck. I wasn't going to chase answers. I was done. It's been 6 months since that trip. I haven't gone camping since, haven't even set foot in a forest. I don't talk about it much, not to friends, not to family, because what would I say? That something out there knew my name? That it carved messages into trees and stood outside my tent at night? No one would believe me. Hell, I barely believe it myself. But I don't need anyone to, because I know what I saw. And I know one thing for certain. The woods aren't empty. They never were. And if you hear a whisper in the night, if you wake up to footprints that aren't yours, if you see something standing just beyond the firelight, don't look. And whatever you do, don't go back. I don't remember exactly when I first noticed it. The feeling of being watched. At first it was subtle. An unease creeping along my spine as I walked home at night. A prickling at the back of my neck when I sat alone in my apartment. I told myself it was nothing, that it was just the natural paranoia that comes with living in a city. But deep down I knew I was lying. Because it wasn't just a feeling. Little things started happening. Things I couldn't explain away. My bedroom window. Unlocked when I was sure I had locked it. A sticky note that I had left on my fridge for my roommate Ava. Missing when I came home. A faint smell of cologne in my living room. Something neither of us wore. Then there was the bouquet. It was waiting on my car one evening, deep red roses wrapped in brown paper. No note, no card, no indication of where it had come from. Ava thought it was sweet. "Maybe you have a secret admirer," she teased. "I don't get why you're so freaked out." But I was freaked out because there was something off about those flowers. The way they were placed so carefully, deliberately. Like someone had stood there for a while, waiting for me to find them. Like they knew my schedule, like they knew me. I went to the police, reported what I could. They were polite, patient, but it was clear they didn't take me seriously. "Miss Weston, it sounds like you may have a secret admirer," one officer had said, giving me an almost bored smile. I left feeling like an idiot. But I knew I wasn't imagining things, and I knew I needed help. That's when I made the post. It was late, nearly 2 a.m., and I was curled up in bed, my laptop's glow the only light in the room. My hands hovered over the keyboard, hesitating, because once I wrote it down, it would make everything real. Then, with a deep breath, I started typing. I think I'm being stalked, but no one believes me. I poured everything out, the flowers, the unlocked window, the tiny movements of my things. I wrote about how I felt like someone was watching me, tracking me. Has anyone been through something like this? What do? I hit post. Within minutes, the responses flooded in. Trust your gut. Set up cameras. Check for trackers on your car. Do not ignore this. I felt a strange kind of relief, like I wasn't alone anymore. But then, a new comment appeared. A single sentence. "You shouldn't have posted this, Clara." I froze. The username was just a random string of numbers. No profile picture, no bio. I refreshed the page. Another comment. "You shouldn't have posted this, Clara. You shouldn't have posted this, Clara. You shouldn't have posted this, Clara." 3 times. And then, a picture, a grainy, low-lit image of me, sitting on my couch, inside my apartment. My lungs clenched. I scrambled backward in bed, my breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. I hadn't taken that picture. I had never taken that picture. Someone else had. I clapped my laptop shut, my entire body trembling. My ears were ringing. My eyes darted around the room as if expecting to see someone standing there watching me. I had been so careful. But now, he knew I knew. And I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. My hands were still shaking when I grabbed my phone and called Ava. It rang once, twice, straight to voicemail. Shit. I jumped out of bed, scanning the apartment. The air felt thick, like I was breathing in something heavy, something unseen. My heart pounded in my ears as I double-checked every lock, every window, the front door, the sliding glass door to the balcony, my bedroom window. All locked. So how the hell had someone taken that picture? My laptop was still shut, sitting on the bed like it was something toxic. I couldn't look at it. I didn't want to see the post again. Didn't want to see that comment, those words, repeating over and over. You shouldn't have posted this, Clara. I grabbed my car keys. I needed to get out of here. The streets were eerily quiet as I drove, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. I kept checking the rearview mirror, convinced I would see headlights following me. I couldn't go to the police. They already thought I was paranoid. What was I going to tell them? Someone commented on my post with a picture of me inside my apartment. They'd laugh me out of the station. Ava. I just needed to get to Ava's place. 15 minutes later, I pulled into her apartment complex, cutting the engine. I grabbed my phone and tried calling again. Still no answer. I hurried up the stairs, knocking hard on her door. Nothing. I knocked again. Ava, it's me. Silence. My stomach twisted. Something was wrong. Then, just as I was about to knock again, the door creaked open. Ava stood there, her expression blank. I exhaled, trying to steady myself. Jesus, Ava, I've been calling you. You shouldn't have posted it. I froze. Ava's voice was flat, wrong, like she wasn't really here. I took a step back. What? Her face was eerily still, her eyes locked onto mine. You shouldn't have posted it, she repeated. A chill raced down my spine. Something was very, very wrong. I turned to run, but someone grabbed me from behind. I tried to scream, but a hand clamped over my mouth. A strong grip wrapped around my waist, yanking me back into the apartment. My feet kicked against the wooden floor, my fingers clawing at the arm holding me, but whoever it was didn't let go. Ava just stood there watching, expressionless, like she wasn't even Ava anymore. I thrashed harder, twisting in the grip, desperate to see who had me. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. My vision blurred, panic choking my lungs. Then, a voice whispered against my ear, "You shouldn't have posted it, Clara." It wasn't Ava. It was him. I swung my elbow back with every ounce of strength I had. My arm collided with something solid, and the grip loosened just enough for me to tear free. I stumbled forward, spinning around. The apartment was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the floor. But no one was there. My chest rose and fell in sharp, panicked breaths. My arms trembled. I could still feel the lingering pressure where he had grabbed me, the ghost of his touch still burning against my skin. I wasn't imagining this. I turned back to Ava, my breath catching in my throat. She was still standing there, in the same exact spot, motionless. Her eyes were fixed on me, but they weren't right. They weren't hers. Something about them felt hollow, empty, like she wasn't really looking at me, like she was just waiting. My hands shook. Ava. She blinked, once, slowly. You shouldn't have posted it. A third time, the exact same words, the exact same tone. I felt sick. Something was inside her. Or someone. I took a slow step backward, keeping my eyes on her. Ava, you're scaring me. She didn't respond. I reached for my phone, fumbling with the screen, trying to call someone. My fingers felt like ice as I pressed the emergency dial. 911. The call connected. I opened my mouth to speak, And then, just as the operator's voice came through, the phone died. No warning, no battery low notification, just dead. The screen went black. I stared at it, horrified. Ava tilted her head. I turned and bolted for the door. My hands fumbled for the handle, but it wouldn't turn. The lock, the damn lock. I twisted it, throwing my weight against the door, but it didn't move. Like something on the other side was holding it shut. I slammed my fist against the wood. "Help! Someone help me!" No response. The apartment walls felt thinner, the air heavier, as if the whole space had been swallowed by something unseen. My own shouting sounded warped, like it wasn't really reaching beyond the walls. I turned back to Ava. She hadn't moved, but now she was smiling. It was slow, wrong, a cold, dead smile, like she was waiting for something, or someone. Then, the apartment lights flickered once, and she lurched forward. Fast. Too fast. I screamed. I dove out of the way, hitting the floor hard. Pain shot up my elbows, but I scrambled to my feet as Ava's body collapsed where I had been standing. She lay there, twitching slightly, her mouth moving like she was trying to speak, but no sound came out. Then, slowly, she lifted her head. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was crying. Her lips trembled as she forced out a whisper. "Clara." It was her voice this time, her real voice. "I can't," she gasped, clutching her head. "I can't make him stop." Tears streaked her face. She looked at me, terrified. And then, through shaky breaths, "He's inside my head." A cold dread coiled around my stomach. I stepped forward, my voice barely above a whisper. "Ava, what happened?" She opened her mouth, but something stopped her. Her eyes went wide, her breath hitching, and then she collapsed. I barely caught her before she hit the ground, my arms wrapping around her trembling body. I shook her gently. "Ava, Ava, wake up." Nothing. Her skin was cold. A horrible thought clawed at my mind. What if she's already gone? I pressed my fingers against her wrist, searching for a pulse. Faint, weak, but there. I let out a shaky breath, forcing myself to think. I needed help. I needed to get out of here. I reached for the door again, and this time it opened effortlessly. The hallway outside was silent, dead. I turned back to Ava, my chest heaving. I had to get her out of here. I knelt down, sliding my arms under her shoulders, getting ready to lift her. Then, something shifted in the room. I went completely still. The air grew heavy again, too thick, like something else was in here. Watching, I turned my head slowly, and that's when I saw it. A shadow, standing in the corner of the room, tall, unmoving. It hadn't been there before. I couldn't see his face, but I knew who it was. My body refused to move. The only thing I could hear was my own breathing, shallow, trembling. Then, the whisper came again, so close, right next to my ear. "You shouldn't have posted it, Clara." I didn't scream. I couldn't. The air in the apartment was suffocating, pressing against me like unseen hands. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and frantic, pounding in my ears. The shadow in the corner didn't move, but I knew it was him. Daniel Holt. I didn't know how I knew his name, but in that moment, I just did. It was as if I had always known, as if his presence had been stitched into the background of my life for longer than I realized. He had been watching me, for months, maybe years. Ava's body was limp in my arms, her breath shallow. I had to get her out, now. I didn't care if he was watching. I didn't care if he was standing right there. I moved. I threw my arm under Ava's shoulders and hauled her up. She was dead weight, her body slack, but I held her close, dragging her toward the door. My knees nearly buckled under the strain, but adrenaline pushed me forward. Footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate. I didn't turn around. I reached the hallway, practically falling out of the apartment with Ava in my grip. The second we crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt normal again, like stepping out of a nightmare and into reality. But the fear was still very real. I grabbed my phone from my pocket, my fingers trembling so hard I almost dropped it. I didn't care that my phone had just died on its own minutes ago. I still tried. I pressed the emergency dial. 911. The line rang. It didn't cut off. The call went through. 911, what's your emergency? My voice came out in shaky gasps. There's a man in my friend's apartment. He attacked me. I think my friend's hurt. I need help. Stay on the line, ma'am. What's your location? I was already stumbling down the stairs, half carrying Ava as I rattled off the address. I didn't stop moving. I didn't stop to look behind me. Because I knew if I did, he would still be standing there, watching me. The police arrived in less than 5 minutes. I barely remembered the next few moments: flashing lights, officers moving toward the apartment, paramedics taking Ava from my arms. I stood there, shaking, my entire body still buzzing with adrenaline as an officer tried to talk to me. Miss Weston, can you tell us what happened? I was breathless. 2 was attacked. In there he was, in there. I pointed to the open apartment door. My friend Avahe did something to her. She wasn't acting like herself. The officer nodded. Do you know who he is? I swallowed. I couldn't say his name. It felt too real. I don't know. I lied. The officers swept through the apartment. They found nothing. No sign of forced entry. No shadowy figure lurking in the corners. And Ava? The paramedics said she was physically fine. No injuries, no signs of trauma. But she wouldn't wake up. I watched as they loaded her into the ambulance, my pulse still throbbing against my skin. A detective approached me. A man in his 40s, salt and pepper hair, tired eyes. Detective James Foster. He asked me to explain everything, so I did. I told him about the stalking, the post, the comment, the picture that someone took of me inside my own home. His face stayed neutral. He didn't interrupt. He just let me talk. When I finally stopped, he sighed and rubbed his jaw. We're going to investigate, he said. We'll go through security footage, check any cameras in the area. But I have to be honest, Miss Weston, without physical evidence, this is going to be difficult. I felt my stomach drop. But the picture, I said, voice shaking. It was taken inside my apartment. That's proof. Foster nodded. Can you show it to me? I hesitated. Then, slowly, I reached for my phone. I opened the forum, scrolling back to my post. My breath caught. The comment was gone. The picture was gone, like it had never been there at all. I stared at the empty screen, my fingers going cold. This isn't possible, I whispered. Foster gently took my phone, scrolling through it himself. Are you sure it was here? Yes, I said immediately. But I could already see it, the doubt flickering in his expression. I felt sick. I knew what this looked like. I knew how it sounded. Like I had imagined all of it. I turned to Ava, still unconscious on the stretcher. I needed her to wake up. I needed her to tell them what happened. But what if she didn't remember? What if whatever happened to her wiped it away? Foster sighed again. I believe that you believe something is happening, he said carefully. For now, let's get you somewhere safe. We'll assign officers to your apartment, see if anything turns up. I nodded numbly. But deep down, I already knew the truth. They wouldn't find anything. Because he had been careful. And because he was still out there, watching, waiting. 2 days later, Ava woke up. She didn't remember a thing. Not me coming to her apartment, not me dragging her out. Not the words she had whispered before she collapsed. He's inside my head. She was fine, perfectly normal, no signs of harm, no lasting damage. She told the police I had probably overreacted, that she had just been really tired and maybe fainted. That's what they wrote down. And that's how the case ended. No suspect, no evidence, nothing. I stopped sleeping, stopped checking my emails, stopped looking at my phone because I was terrified that I would see another comment. A part of me wondered if I was losing my mind, if I had imagined it all. Until one day, a letter arrived at my doorstep. No return address, no stamp, just my name on the front. I didn't want to open it, but I did. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No threats, no rambling messages. Just 3 words, written neatly in the center. I saw you. I moved across the country 2 weeks later. New apartment, new city, new number. I deleted all my social media, changed my name on everything I could. But even now, in this new place, in this new life, I still feel it. That same feeling. That prickling at the back of my neck. That tiny, nagging certainty. That somewhere, someone is watching me. And maybe, just maybe, he's still out there. Still waiting. Still reading. The end.